I thought I'd talk about what came the closest to my favorite job, which was working in a casino. And now, my dad was a gambler, and what's indicative of that is what he left me when he died, which was an empty money clip. And he actually bought that money clip in 1956 when he set the record for the number of passes at a crap table at Harrah's in Reno. And it was my most prized possession. It was actually the only thing I owned that I really cared about. And so, of course, it got stolen. But anyway, besides growing up in jock world, it was gambling. When we were kids, other kids would get, novelties and packs of gum and crap like that in their stockings. We would get miniature roulette wheels, poker chips, decks of cards, and dice in ours. And like the first thing my brothers and I learned to play was poker and blackjack. So we'd go to Tahoe a lot, and we went there, I thought, because of the lake, but it was actually because my father wanted to be able to gamble, on either side of the lake at those casinos there. So I'd always wanted to work in a casino. In '76, a buddy gave me a ride to South Lake Tahoe. I walked into the first club I came to, which was Harvey's Resort Hotel, and I got a job. Most people start as a change boy or a change girl, and you got that 25-pound bag that you carry around full of coins and everything, and it's a real pain in the ass. But the next promotion is to key man, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that would be my ideal job. I didn't want to be a dealer or a stick man or anything. I wanted to be a key man because all you did was, you had black slacks, white shirt, black tie, and this cheesy red sport coat. And you just wandered around, you managed a section of slot machines, you were responsible for the change girls and all the money and paying off jackpots. And in fact, you didn't do shit. And so I would smoke dope before my shifts as a change boy, but I waited to take psychedelics till I was a key man. So they finally promoted me to key man, and I remember getting dressed, and I was living up the road in the Blackjack Motel, except it had been condemned. And the owner let me rent a deserted room out back. I remember the swimming pool didn't have any water in it. It was full of pine needles and crushed beer cans. So you knew the kind of people that lived there. But I remember putting on that sport coat and walking up there, and I'd taken mescaline earlier. This is my first shift. I'm responsible for all these people and money, and that's what I always loved, was just to ride that wave. And you're a gambler. When you walk into those casinos, it's kind of silent outside, and then you push the doors open and you're hit by this wave of sound and colors, yep, and desperation. And I remember I stepped in there, and these change girls came running up, and these customers come up, and they're bitching, and you're getting that rush in your jaw, and they're all yelling at me, and I thought, God damn, there's no such thing as a good job. This is as close as it gets, And so I became a key man. I was working swing shift, and of course I was dead broke. I made about $100 a week. And Bill Harrah always, who owned Harrah's Clubs, always said it in a book. He said it didn't matter what you paid your employees, because they'd give 70% of it back to you, gambling themselves. And that was absolutely true. But my problem was that the Thai weed and the Maui Wowie were being sold up there at the time. They were each like $150 an ounce. So I used all my money buying them. So what I would do is, I didn't have any money for food. So when I went to work, I'd put sandwich bags in the sport coat pockets in front. And if I walked by, people are always in a hurry there to gamble, and people would only eat like half their sandwich. So I'd walk by and pretend I was looking around, and I'd fill my pocket with half-eaten sandwiches, and that's what I lived on. And so you counted on tips. I'd be paid. Sometimes if there was a big jackpot, I had to okay him, and sometimes a generous customer would give me money, or the change girls would share their tips with me. And the big thing was the lost and found. If you're ever in a casino, watch people. It isn't just the janitors and things. It's the change people and everything. You walk around with half an eye on the floor because everybody has money and chips. And when they drop someone, it's not like you tell them, you scoop it up. And I found $100 chip once. God, I thought I'd used up my luck for life, And so that was the old one-armed bandits day. There weren't any the electric slot machines had just started, but slot machines cover all the overhead in a casino. Everything else is gravy. And Harvey's, where I worked, had more slot machines than anywhere in the country then. I think it was over 500. But my whole deal was, I can't stand rudeness. I can't stand people who give workers shit. I wouldn't give a waiter, waitress shit, for instance, unless they actually spit in my food in front of me. As a working person, I assumed everyone else hated it as much as I do. And so in a casino, people are shit-faced, and they'd give you shit. And a typical exchange with me would be something like, I'd walk by some guy and he'd go, "Hey, Stretch, your fucking machines don't pay." And I go, "Hey, loser, who gives a shit?" And the thing is, in a casino, this is my theory, they were so used to being comped and being given free drinks and everybody catering to them, that this idea that this 6'6" rooster would walk around and tell them to fuck off, they just somehow couldn't process it. So I started to find that I enjoyed giving drunks shit. This was a dark side of me that I hadn't seen. And of course, I was indifferent to the consequences because though it was my all-time favorite job, that didn't mean I liked doing it. I couldn't wait to get out of there. So finally, this goes on for months. Finally, one shift, the head supervisor and two others come up and they corner me. And they go, "Park, this woman just came up to us and told her that she said you told her she was a total moron and a shitty loser." And I thought, finally, it restored my faith in humanity. I was already thinking about where I was going to go next. And I said, "Well, was she blonde or brunette?" I've been telling women that all night. And these three guys look at me and then they break out laughing. They say, "Oh, Park, we knew she was just drunk. We knew that you of all people wouldn't talk to people like that." So I was foiled again. And I tried to avoid customers. And the worst thing that I ever saw happen in a casino, and when people told me about this, I insisted that it was total bullshit, is they told me on New Year's Eve, when it was so packed, that particularly the women who were in there all the time playing the slot machines, they would not wear panties. Because if you left your machine to go take a leak, you'd never get it back. So they wouldn't wear panties, and they'd hunch over where they were and piss on the carpet. No. And I said, "Come on." I said, "I've seen a lot of shit. I've never seen anything like that." So New Year's Eve happens, and I sort of forgot about it. It's 4 a.m, and I noticed, what was that smell? I was thinking, what was that smell? And one of the change girls came up to me and she said, "Have you walked down that aisle where the high pay and slots were?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, do it." And sure enough, I walked along the carpet. It was like squish, 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 squish. The carpet was soaked, So my idea of a good time was on breaks. Change girls and key men that had the same break that I would, I'd take him out in the parking lot and smoke what I called my jumbo combo, which was I would mix the Maui Wowie and the Thai weed, and I'd put it in a joint, and it was so greasy that after one hit, it was transparent. You could see the buds in there. And a lot of these change girls had never smoked before, so I thought this was a good introduction to marijuana for them. And so that went on a few months, and then I took off and I went to Seattle, to live with Nancy, the Scientologist, who I later married. So a couple of years later, I'm down in LA. I'm living in Hollywood. I'm living with another Scientologist, and she was gone for the day. And there's a knock on the door, and I open it, and it's my old buddy from the casino, Musty Phillips. And, you know, I hadn't seen or heard from him since. And he was selling insurance, and apparently through Social Security or something, he found out what my address was. So he was in that part of town. He dropped by to see me. And it was great to see him. And, you know, we sat on the couch and we were talking. And he said, how's things going? And I said, well, pretty shitty, really. I think, often I said I thought of just getting the fuck out of here and going back and work in the casino. And he said, I wouldn't if I were you. And I said, well, why not? And he said, you never heard? And I said, no. And he said, 2 weeks after you left, they'd been having so many shortages from change girls that Red, who ran that department, he finally heard that it was because they went out and smoked dope with you. So they put the entire shift on a lie detector. And Musty said they'd call you in, they'd strap you up, and they'd ask you a couple of questions. And then they said, did you, on your shift while you were working at Harvey's, go out in the parking lot and smoke a jumbo combo with Steve Park? And I said, holy shit, you're kidding. I said, did they catch any of you in a lie? And he said, all of us. And I said, all 30 of us. And I said, well, what'd they do? And he said, well, what could they do? They couldn't fire the whole shift.